Yeah. Okay, ready.
Yes.
Starting.
You're gonna.
Here we go. Hitting the button.
Movie sign.
And we're live. Here we go. See people coming in. 20, 25, 30. Excellent. 40.
All right, that's max. Shut it down. All right, guys, that was the deal.
See ya.
I'm only doing 40.
Oh no, we got a few more. 50. I love this part.
Yeah.
I love seeing everybody. All right. Got some chat going on there.
If anyone's curious what we do here before the stream starts, if you've ever seen like the beginning of the old Mystery Science Theater 3000 show where they just run around saying we've got movie sign, it's pretty much that, just with less robots.
Yeah, pretty much. 56. So I'm going to wait till that number stabilizes, at least for a little bit before we get started. We're at 56 now, 57. Feel like an auctioneer. Do I hear 58?
We're gonna do something special if we get to 100.
I will shave James's beard. How's that?
Okay.
Well, it has to be a higher number than that, I think.
You can't do that before Conant.
Oh yeah,
that's true.
Right.
You
can't.
Pro tip to the audience: the default for Zoom is to only send chat to panelists. So make sure you're chatting to everybody.
Yeah, I forget that every single time. Well, except for this time.
We should tag them on Twitter right now and let them know that's an awful feature.
I know. I don't know why that's the default. We're at 65.
I can't find where you changing the settings anywhere. I've looked everywhere.
Now we're seeing all the attendees say hello.
Yeah, there we go.
Feel free to drop your Slack handle. Everyone's in here under names, and I don't recognize any of these names.
That's right.
Oh, I saw John Rose.
Yeah.
All right, we're at 61. I guess we give it another minute, maybe, for any last try.
I got 67. Oh, 61. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'll do the math. Yeah.
So yeah, anyone that spent any amount of time in the Slack channel hopefully feels the same, like really neat sense of community that I do. When you start seeing a lot of the same people that are active, you know, not every day, but like weekly, and you start to like recognize handles and you can identify personalities. That's just a really cool part of the community that we have here.
Yeah. A Diva here.
Nice.
Winner of the OSINT Workspace contest for a couple of CTFs ago.
Somebody asked for the Slack channel.
I see some of my local group people here from my geographical area. I'm not going to dox myself quite yet.
All right. We're at 76 and holding. I think it's slowly going up, but we're 4 minutes over, so we might as well get started. I'm just going to do a brief introduction to get us started, and then we'll jump right into it. So welcome everybody from around the world. Thank you for your time. I'm really excited about this evening. This is the world's first Trace Labs OSINT VM live demo and QA. And the key component of this is the Q&A component, right? So we're going to do some demo of it. The guys are going to go through it, but really we're hoping that it's going to be interactive and that you'll have questions. And then you can really kind of get into it with the guys and ask them all the things that you probably would have been wondering. So we're going to have different skill sets, different levels in this session, and that's totally fine. So there's no bad question. Ask whatever you want. Really try to challenge these guys if you can, and that'd be great. So with that, I'll get started. We've got Tom, Alex, and Jason here tonight. So thanks very much. These guys have put tons of work into this, not only into this session tonight, but into the VM in general, which is a fantastic tool for the community and something that's got great reviews. So first of all, thank you to the three of you guys for doing that huge job, and we really appreciate it. So with that, we'll get started. I'm going to hand it over to you guys now. Thank you very much. It's all yours.
All right. As Adrian says, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm so excited that everyone made some time on their either Friday night or Saturday morning, if you're Jason, to spend some time with us and interact with us, get your questions answered about the virtual machine. As Rob alluded to, a lot of hard work has gone into this product, but it doesn't stop there. The only way it continues to get better and continues to be a viable solution for the OSINT community is with stuff like this, with feedback from you all. Otherwise, it's just going to be Tom and Jason and Alex's VM. So don't be afraid to drop feedback in the Slack channel, tag us on Twitter, DM us, open up an issue on GitHub. Anything you can think of to make this product better is actually going to benefit the entire OSINT community. So it's going to take all of us to get there. And I just really want to say I appreciate you all taking some time to hang out with us tonight. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Can you all see my slides?
Well, you skipped to the end here.
That's
what I'm seeing. There you go.
Okay.
And they are not yet full screen, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah. Welcome. Okay. Are we good on slides now?
I think so.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, and our observers are saying they see us and we're looking good.
Yay. Okay. So I like to kick off any presentation I'm doing, no matter what the subject matter, with an overview of why are we here, what do we hope to achieve, a couple ground rules, and then just lay out an agenda for the presentation. But first thing I do want to toss out there is that the first rule of engagement is be engaged. We want you to be asking questions. Try to use the Q&A section of the chat. That way we can keep track of them, organize them. They don't get lost in the general chat, but we'll also be trying to answer just the chat questions as well as they come in. We're going to pause kind of at opportune times to try and answer questions. Could be a few minutes, could be 10 or 15, but we really, really want you all to interact and ask questions. So please don't be afraid to use the Q&A section. Why are we here? Excellent question. This presentation is going to be geared towards people that don't have a lot of VirtualBox experience, or a lot of virtual machine experience, I should say. If you're already running VMs day in, day out, if you're using Linux as a daily driver, you might not get as much from this presentation or from this demo as everybody else, but there's still value in you being here just from your experiences. And you'll at least get a tour of our VM. But that's going to be who it's geared towards. So we're going to assume that you don't even have VirtualBox installed right now. We're going to show you from hopefully start to finish how to get the VM up and running. I said the first rule of engagement was be engaged. Second one is just be respectful. Everyone is super great in the Slack, so I don't expect that we're going to have any problems here. And finally, what to expect. Expect to learn something. That's a good expectation to have. Expect to maybe learn things that you didn't know, maybe get a better understanding of things you do know, and expect to ask questions. I can't bring that up enough. So, overview of what we're going to be doing here tonight. We're going to run through some speaker introductions, give you a quick background on myself, Alex, and Jason. we're going to give you an overview of virtual machines. If we just try to jump straight into the Trace Labs VM and you weren't familiar or comfortable with virtual machines, a lot of stuff is going to get lost in the shuffle. So we're going to talk through what are virtual machines, what are some of their use cases. We're going to demo the install process for VirtualBox. We're going to show you how to get and import the Trace Labs virtual machine. And probably most importantly, we're going to talk through some of the common obstacles you might have during the install process and either how to work through them or how to find answers to your problems. We've already had a lot of really good troubleshooting going on in the Slack channel. So thank you to everyone that's been a part of that. Finally, we're going to give you a tour of the VM. Jason has been the driving force behind its existence. So he's going to talk us through, why does it even exist? How do you make a VM? Or how do you make a custom Kali distribution? We're going to go over some Linux basics. If you're not really comfortable on the terminal, we're going to get you comfortable. We're going to go over how the VM's organized. Why are certain things in certain places? How do you fire up tools? And then finally, we're going to hopefully be able to demo a tool or two, probably on me. I guess I just volunteered to be the one getting OSINTed tonight. So big picture, that's how it's going to go, but it is going to be kind of an organic process. If we have more questions in a certain section, we're going to obviously spend more time there. Okay. Introductions. Who are we and why should you listen to us? An excellent question. One I ask Alex every single day. Myself, I'm Tom. I am humanDecoded in the Slack. I describe myself as maybe the least technically sophisticated member of the team. I don't do InfoSec for a job. This is just something I do on the side. So my relationship with virtual machines is going to be entirely recreational. If I'm on Mac OS, I'm just running a VM so I can, fire up Kali or fire up Unix or just run some, maybe I need Windows for something. So I don't use virtual machines in my job. It's just something I have kind of running just so I can have more fun on my computers. Alex, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Alex. Certainly been using virtual machines for quite some time. I do information security. I've done some pen testing, found some clever uses for virtual machines. Some examples that I can give would be just using them to exfiltrate data, because virtual machines can oftentimes exist on a separate network or use a separate wireless dongle. And you can connect the two, you can kind of bridge the two to get information out. So I've done that in a pen testing environment. I've also used a lot of virtual machines for testing purposes, to safely test malware, to take things apart, or for a lot of the challenge boxes as well. So I've used those in order to just connect my attack machine to a target machine, all virtualized, and you get to try out some tools. And if everything goes sideways, that's fine. It's not wrecking your actual host machine. You just revert or you blow it away. And we'll get into all those terms in a bit. So throughout this talk today.
Yep. So okay, over to me. Yeah. So I'm Jason, also known as Snacks. I work in cybersecurity. I do a lot of security operations. So we use a lot of virtual machines to analyze different malware or different nasty websites, try different tools out. So I tend to use virtual machines probably on a daily basis. So I guess I'm hoping out of this that people can get up and running for their next CTF, either with this virtual machine, with the Trace Labs virtual machine, or whatever other choice they have, such as Ubuntu or just Kali by itself. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. So as you can see, we have a pretty diverse crowd doing the presentation tonight, a whole range of experiences, and we all approach virtual machines a little bit differently. Jason's example he gave was maybe more analytical, more understanding. Alex's was a bit more aggressive, and mine was just purely for fun. So we come from a lot of different places, and we should be able to answer your questions.
Yeah, and that should also reflect the variety of participants that we have here that come from a wide array of backgrounds. So sometimes we get that where we are asked, you know, who can use this? I'm not a high level InfoSec guy. Can I do OSINT? And yes, you can do OSINT. We'll teach you. We teach just about anybody. So that's also why we're here, is just to kind of have that well blended community there, that you're going to have, you know, some people that really know virtual machines and ins and outs, and somebody that might be new to it, but you all have unique takes on things that we would certainly appreciate.
Excellent point, Alex. Thank you. So, what is a virtual machine? Also called a VM. If you've seen any of my memes in the Slack channel or on Twitter, it's a virtual computer running on your host system, or a simulation inside a simulation. For all intents and purposes, it's a pretend computer running on your real computer. And kind of the sad part is it doesn't know it's pretend. It thinks it's a real computer. And that always kind of bothers me whenever I'm running VMs. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. Oh, just me? Okay. But it truly is a full-fledged operating system running inside of your computer. Now, something has to manage it, and that's called the hypervisor. You can just think of the hypervisor as the container around your virtual machine. It makes sure it doesn't, you know, interact with the host system in a way that it's not supposed to. And it sort of creates that illusion that it is a self-contained operating system. I said container, but a better word is probably sandboxed. Virtual machines, in theory, are what's called sandboxed. So that means that they can't directly interact with the host system. And in some of the examples Jason gave, that's a really good thing. If you're doing malware analysis, you want to have that as isolated as possible. So I said that they're a computer running inside your computer. Well, they are going to be taking resources away from your host machine. A computer needs CPUs, a computer needs RAM, a computer needs hard drive space. It's going to be taking all those things from your host machine. Oh, and just whenever I say host, that means your real computer. If I say guest, that's your virtual machine. So those resources have to come from somewhere. And depending on your machine, if you're running, say, a laptop, those resources can be pretty scarce. If you only have 8 gigs of RAM in your MacBook, like I do, you don't have a ton of RAM to spare for your virtual machines. But that's okay, because a lot of VMs can run just fine with maybe 1 CPU and maybe 2 gigs of RAM. The other really cool part, I keep talking about how they think that they're real computers. They can actually interact with the host network. So you can set it up, and we'll show you how to do this in such a way that it's going to have its own IP address on your LAN. So it's going to appear as a computer or as a system on the LAN. So you can SSH into it. You can FTP into it. You could set it up as a web server. I mean, I can't exaggerate the analogy enough that it really is a computer inside of your computer. Okay. Alex or Jason, any questions so far? I'm full screened over here.
No, and it's good to be able to use a virtual machine in order to test out different operating systems. I like having a lot of RAM available on my machine for testing different things. or even just testing something within Windows, that you own a copy of Windows, but you can use it in a virtual environment there just to test things. And if you make a mistake, then you're not trashing everything. Yeah, and certainly having it interact with different machines there is very handy. Comes in very handy for information security, just having two boxes talking to each other and figuring out vulnerabilities and stuff from that.
Yeah, very good. So I think coming into this, everyone probably had a decent idea of what virtual machines are, but I'd be doing you all a disservice if I didn't really drive home some of these key points. So with that being said, now we can talk about why use a VM at all. Like, what's the point? Like, what's the, like, why run a fake computer on your real computer? Well, why not just use a real computer? Jason and Alex have already hit on some really good reasons, but we're going to go into a little bit more depth on that now. So why use a virtual machine? I'm going to go into the everyday use cases, and then I'll pass it off to those two for the second bullet points. For every day, like, you can use virtual machines for a lot of really cool things. Probably coolest is being able to, say, run a Linux system alongside your Mac or your Windows machine. Or if you're already maybe on Linux, like, try out a different distro. It's just so nice to be able to fire up a very sort of low stakes operating system. You're not reformatting your entire computer. The other kind of cool thing that you can do just kind of day in, day out is just like segment parts of your digital life. If you have enough resources to dedicate to multiple VMs, you can have one be for web browsing. You can have one be for Tor. You could have one be for just other stuff. So for me personally, in my everyday, I use it to just run multiple operating systems on my machines and to add some isolation and segmentation to my online life. Alex or Jason, do y'all want to take the next two bullet points?
Sure, I can take the next one for some InfoSec and pen test use cases, and I think Jason can expand on that. I use them, again, for a lot of practice hacking there. It's very useful for that. There are a lot of virtual machines that you can download as target machines that they say, okay, try to break into this machine, so you can break into something that you own, control, has already been set up for you. Additionally, it's very handy for use on what might be a hostile network as well. So if you do go to these security conferences, a lot of people like to set up virtual machines for use at a security conference there, because then they can blow that away at the end of the conference. In professional use, you can also, if you're doing a pen test or anything dealing with potentially sensitive material there, at the end of the engagement, you can give that assurance that any data that you collected is not on your machine. You can either archive that image or destroy that image, that virtual machine, and give those assurances that if you did successfully exploit something and got data down, that's not leaving your machine. So it's in a virtual environment, kind of a sandbox environment there as well. So it's able to keep a lot of things kind of clean and tidy, and very, very segmented there and very distinct, which will help out both with the InfoSec and when we get into the investigative use cases there. It helps out a lot there as well.
Yep. And I'm going to press pause right there. I saw some really good questions come through the Q&A. And just so nothing gets lost sort of in general chat, for the Q&A stuff, let's try and like read those out loud and maybe answer them as a team, just so maybe nothing gets lost in the general chat. Like,
sure. Do we want to go? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Like, I saw a really good question come through about Docker and Kubernetes. So let me give you my my understanding of the question and my understanding of the subject. And then if anybody else would like to chime in, please do. So a virtual machine, the question was, could you also use Docker/Kubernetes to run an OS? So a virtual machine is essentially, like I said, a fake computer. Docker is a really simple environment that you would use to do very, very specific things. So it's my understanding that you could run an entire OS in Docker, but at that point, you've kind of missed the point of Docker. So I guess my understanding of Docker is you spin it up for very, very specific use cases, maybe with like just one application. Anybody else like to add to that?
It's good to, if you have a lot of dependencies in an application, you can make sure that the application has the right dependencies and no other application interferes with those dependencies, such as like Python libraries and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give credit to Leo here in the chat that said it's better to run Dockers inside VMs versus the other way. That's one of the things that I was going to say is I run Dockers inside VMs, and I've had experiences where the Docker container might not have been the best put together and still kind of experimental. So when that has the potential to break anything else or not work correctly, that's what a virtual environment is great for, is that you grab this Docker container, run it, doesn't work out the way you thought it was. Great, no harm, no foul, and go backwards there. I think one of the Dockers that I use is the pen testing framework that had the Docker instance.
Got it. So it sounds like if we're looking at using the right tool for the right job, virtual machines are probably going to be best for, an all-encompassing solution where you really do need to replicate all the features of an OS. Whereas if you're doing one very specific task, it sounds like Docker might be a better way to go. Okay. I see a really good question in there. Could you please give suggestions to protect a PC from VM escape? So I had mentioned a slide or two ago that in theory, virtual machines are sandboxed. The idea behind that is that things inside the sandbox can't escape. Well, we don't live in a perfect world. Jason, with your background, could you maybe speak to VM escape and some of the pitfalls or ways to prevent that, or maybe like how to avoid it?
Yeah, so probably the best way would be just to make sure you patch your virtual machine hypervisor. So if you have VMware Workstation or VirtualBox, just make sure it's updated to the latest version, because there are some vulnerabilities that exist where you can get to the host machine. But I think for what we're doing here, it's probably not a major threat. It just means that you could potentially read something off of your host machine. The other thing would be you can turn on copy and paste between your virtual machine, and you can network between your virtual machine and your home network. So there's some settings that you can enable to make sure that you isolate the virtual machine, such as, I think we'll be going into this later, like you can enable NAT mode, which is probably by default anyway. Just make sure everything's isolated, or you can just completely isolate it from your network and the internet.
Yeah, and I like what you said about that's certainly a possibility. It does happen out in the wild, and that's something that you might have to worry about, doing malware analysis. But I think if we're looking at the use case for an OSINT focused VM, that threat is probably much, much, much lower than it is, say, for you during your day job. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's right. Generally, we just make sure that probably we're running a machine off the network and in a virtual machine. We want to be completely detached from a corporate network or a network we care about when we're performing that kind of stuff. So yeah, that would be correct.
Got it. And then our last bullet point, investigative use cases. Alex, do you want to take this one? Like, how do you use a VM when you're conducting an OSINT investigation?
Yeah, so I use the OSINT investigation both just to have a clean slate, and we'll go through that. I start off with the machine as close to unused as possible. So I generally do some updates. Think there might be some tool updates there as well. Install anything that I want to use and just have that as fresh and a golden of image as I can. And then I just save that so that I can go back to it. So for a investigative purpose, I use it from that fresh slate, don't have any cross-contaminations, don't have any records of previous license plates that I might have searched, phone numbers I searched, don't have any of that gunk in there to possibly give me erroneous information. And that kind of leads into, I think Tom skipped ahead to the aspect of what could possibly go wrong. And that's that there's always that slight chance that you make a mistake or you do something that might leave a trace back to you. And that's accidental, that's an oops there. So we always kind of practice safe OSINTing. And for anything that could go wrong, you have that machine that you can just delete, revert, and it might also provide a lot of avenues for covering your tracks. Now at Trace Labs, we're very zero touch, so we don't want anybody to do any sort of active engagements or do anything that leaves a trace, but hey, accidents happen there. It's like, I think all of us have done that one time to where you go, did I click something that I shouldn't have clicked? You start getting some weird friend requests on your social media accounts, on your fake social media accounts, and you go, did I click something wrong? This gives a layer of protection there for those assurances.
Excellent. And the last kind of point I'll try to make before we go into some of the live stuff, and to be quite honest, I'm just trying to put off the live demo as long as possible because they're terrifying. The last point I'll make is what is the use case for a Trace Labs, OSINT investigation? Like why would you want to run a VM? And Alex hit on a lot of really good points, and so did Jason. But these virtual machines are going to be amazing for organization. All the tools are going to be right there and they're already set up either the way we've set them up or just the way that you like them. Like this is it's almost like a separate office that you're walking into and it's just the way that you like it and you know exactly how to use it. There's the organizational effect of a virtual machine. There's, as Alex and Jason hit on, isolation. But that also ties back into organization. So you have this neat little investigative environment. So you could almost have a virtual machine for every case. If you're say working ongoing ops and on the Trello board, or you're doing this in your daily life, maybe this is part of your day job. It's not a bad idea to just spin up a VM for every single thing, whether it's an organization or a person. For every investigation you're doing, just fire up a new VM and then you can save it. And there it is. Like there's the entire investigation right there in this nice little package. And then also as Alex puts it, the oopsie factor. If you do make a mistake, it's much better to make a mistake inside of a VM. Last point I'll make, and then I promise we're going to do it live, is let's look at what virtual machines don't do or can't do. Running a virtual machine is not necessarily going to make you anonymous. Now there are VMs that that can, but like Unix and things like that are kind of beyond the scope of this talk. But in general, just running a virtual machine, it's not going to make you anonymous, and it's really not going to make your browsing any more private, because you're still going through whatever internet connection the host machine is hooked up to, probably your, your home network or Starbucks Wi-Fi. So please be aware of that, if anonymity, if privacy is your concern, a virtual machine isn't going to do a lot to help that. Like, all the packets are still coming from the same IP that your host machine is on, unless you're running a separate VM, and we'll talk through that when we're doing the tour. But in general, VMs are not a magic bullet for those things. And if you're trying to set up sock puppet accounts, they can actually make it more difficult. So if you're Facebook and someone comes through trying to make an account and your host system is detected as Kali Linux, well, that's a huge red flag. So please be aware of the things that VMs are great for, the things they're not great for. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them here or in the Slack channel. And everyone's going to have a slightly different philosophy on VMs, or maybe a different personal use case. And the more of those stories that we hear, I think the better we all get as practitioners.
Yeah, we can pause to take some of the questions from our Q&A.
Oh, wow.
We had some that were in the Q&A, some that were typed out in the chat. I tried to grab whatever ones weren't in the Q&A. One of them that I had that didn't show up in the Q&A, we'll start there, is someone asked, what would be the best network settings to contain your VM?
Excellent question. And we'll also be touching on this when we're showing you the Trace Labs VM. But there are effectively going to be two different options that you have. The default for VirtualBox is to run all VMs in what's called NAT, or network address translation. And my everyday person's understanding of that translates into, it's using the same internet, it's using the same network connection as your host machine, and does not appear as its own computer on the network. For maybe lack of a better expression, it's hiding inside of your computer. So all network activity coming from that VM in NAT mode is going to appear as if it's originating from the same computer that it's running on. The other option is to run it in bridged mode. And that's where it actually puts it out there as its own machine. Hey, I've got an IP address, like I'm my own computer on this network. So those are your two options. Jason or Alex, what do you think on which one is better?
Well, I was going to just say, like, with the bridge mode, you just need to be careful, because it effectively means that you're joined to your local area network, and it makes you an individual computer on that network. So if you have services running, they're going to be accessible to that network, whereas NAT gives you a bit more protection. As Tom said, you're hiding behind your host computer's IP address.
Yeah, so for bridge networking, it's like having, and this comes into play if you use multiple VMs, it's like having them sitting next to each other on a network switch. So that you're going to have them visible on a LAN. So that comes in handy if you have multiple VMs that you want all talking to each other, if you're setting up a lab or testing some stuff out. Additionally, there's also the host only mode, which doesn't allow you to communicate out. I think that only your host OS can get access out. I'm just checking some notes that I have. Only your host network would be able to communicate there. So sometimes that can be handy in a VM for doing some sandbox purposes, or just kind of tinkering with some stuff where you don't need network access. So that would really contain it. A couple of other tips for if you have it in NAT only is the bidirectional clipboard and not sharing your drives with the VM, because that can cause some stuff to possibly get leaked. If you're really wanting to contain your virtual environment, then you make sure that those are turned off. And we'll showcase those in our live demo.
Excellent.
One other thing that is good to mention is that since this virtual machine uses Kali, by default, there's no network services enabled. So it's pretty quiet unless you do modifications afterwards. If someone was to probe that virtual machine, they probably wouldn't find much or anything at all, other than returning a ping.
So I guess clearing out some of the other questions that we have here. It says, doing OSINT, do we worry about being ID'd? Should we use a VPN, silo, authenticate, etc.? They know OSINT can be done on the Tor network. So do we worry about being ID'd there?
An excellent question. And I have this discussion over in the Sock Puppet channel frequently. I'll go ahead and give my take and then kick it over to Jason and Alex. As I said, kind of on the last slide, virtual machines are not going to affect that more often than not, one way or the other. So when you're doing OSINT, the amount of privacy or the amount of anonymity you're after is going to be the same process as if you were just on your regular host machine. So if you're worried about, something coming back to your home IP, run a VPN. You can access a lot of things through Tor, but some social media platforms, when you're trying to create accounts, that's a huge red flag. But for example, if you already have a Facebook sock set up, Facebook has a .onion, which is just hilarious, but that's a separate discussion. So once you have those sock puppets set up, if you can access all the sites you need to access via Tor, cool, go for it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so the do we worry about being ID'd? Sort of. You kind of want your OSINT work to blend in that some of these services that you might visit might tell the target that you visited their page. If you have your profile set up as something that tells the world that you're an OSINT investigator, you're doing all these things, looking for bad guys, looking for drug runners, looking for whatever type of information that you're doing, that's going to set off some flags for them. If you just have your sock puppet set up so that it blends in and it just looks like 90% of the other people out there and going, who's this guy that visited my page? Oh, he's just some random guy that also likes the same sports team as me, rides a Harley, and has some really cool tattoos. It's just going to blend in. They're not going to look further. So that's one of the things for, do you worry about being ID'd? It's not like Hollywood, not like the movies, to where you're looking for people, they get an alert at this fancy machine, and then they start tracing you back and having multiple hands on the keyboards typing in and everything there. So we don't worry so much on that, but it's, again, a layer of protection for, if there's any sort of mistakes, if there's any sort of exposure there potentially.
Very good. What's next?
I think we had the question of how quickly do VMs such as Ubuntu do updates for the latest VirtualBox? This person said they updated their VirtualBox and Ubuntu, and Kali stopped working.
It's my understanding it's kind of the other way around, that the the virtual, like whether it's VMware VirtualBox, the hypervisor creators would be lagging behind the distros and would have to update themselves to work alongside whatever updates came down from, Ubuntu. Jason, can you maybe speak to that?
Just having a look at the question. I think, so yeah, what happens is there's like a concept of upstream. VirtualBox have the latest version out, and then in Ubuntu, they have to package it up for Ubuntu. But I think actually for VirtualBox, you can just download the latest version from their website. So generally you can be on the latest update, I would say. If you went to the Oracle VirtualBox website.
Okay. And I will say sometimes I have had difficulty. The absolute latest version of VirtualBox might still run Kali, but maybe shared clipboard stopped working or USB stopped working. And if you do run into that, you can always downgrade. They do make those versions available. You should be able to just roll back to the previous version when it still worked, usually. At least you can on Linux.
And I think one other question that we have, so to protect your host and virtual machines from detections, why not run a VPN to hide the host and the VM IP? Any answers to why not run a VPN?
Oh no, you absolutely can. The only time I would ever discourage VPN use would be during sock puppet creation. At all other times, please by all means run a VM.
And additionally, we do have a lot of questions coming in on sock puppets. Some great questions that we can either save towards the end, or we have a great sock puppet channel. I think we might not get into great detail on sock puppet creation in this webinar, but that might be a good webinar for later. Yes. Doing a sock puppet webinar, because we have a lot of good questions here.
Yes, and if we do a good enough job here, everyone, they'll probably let us do more webinars. So yeah. Thank you for your engagement so far. What we'll do is let's just kind of pass on the sock puppet questions for now. Leave them in the Q&A. Yeah. And if we get ahead of ourselves, we can have a good sock puppet discussion at the very end. Otherwise, we can pick it up in Slack.
Yeah, and I have the other quick question here of, do you patch your VMs? Yes, I do.
Absolutely.
I have a little script that I do that once I get it rewritten, I was going to say I'd share it, but I think there's some errors within the current script that I use. Once I get that rewritten, I will put that somewhere to share for just run that command. There are also updaters within here as well. So we have updaters within our VM, but if you're interested in a slick updater script for a lot of other VMs, I can share that after I fix that.
I just recommend that you don't do anything drastic before, like if you were going to do the CTF, don't do an update just before that starts, because it might be a problem. Like you might be waiting.
Always a good patching principle there is that if you have anything critical coming up, thoroughly evaluate whether you want to patch or not.
Okay. I would like the record to reflect that Alex and Jason are cowards. I'm updating Mac OS right now, and I'm not scared. So if the stream just cuts out, you'll know I finished my update.
Update during a live demo, just yellow second. All right.
No. Before we jump into VirtualBox, that's a really good point. That shame on me. I probably could have expanded on this previously. This is a real operating system, and you could run it for years. If it's a Windows VM, it's going to be getting the same updates that a regular Windows machine would get. If it's Linux, you can apt update upgrade and just keep it in line with whatever the latest package updates are. Like it truly is its own operating system. So you should be exercising the same best practices you would on your laptop. So please, please, please update both your actual hypervisor, so VirtualBox, VMware, and the system inside of it. I'm sure Alex and Jason can tell us InfoSec horror stories about what happens when you don't patch and don't keep up to date.
Yeah, you want to make sure you update.
Save those to the next webinar.
Yeah, you want to make sure you update your Tor browser, for example.
Yes. Well, good. Now we're going to jump into VirtualBox, and we're doing perfect on time. So I really wanted to walk you through, here's VirtualBox, here's how to get it set up on your machine. So can you all see my browser? Was that a yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I can, and it seems like all the participants awesome. Are. Yep.
Okay. So VirtualBox downloads. Okay. And then you can just find your host system. In the case of mine, I'm on Mac OS, so I've already downloaded the DMG. Windows is a Windows install. Linux could be deb packages or I believe RPMs. So this is incredibly straightforward. You're just going to download it and run it. Oh, joke time. What do you guys call it when you're showing off your frequently used programs on the live stream? Doxing.
You find out all sorts of information about the screenplay that humanDecoded is writing.
So I just doxed myself with my doc. Okay, so VirtualBox is going to pop up in the right window. There it is. And it's going to be as simple as installing the package, and you can just jump into your applications folder. Oops, I need to install it first. My bad. I forgot I did not install it. Well, I'm glad that my joke was a big hit in the chat.
Yeah, it seems like you will be forever judged on your choice of software.
Oh, man. I'm just glad I cleared my web history. Okay. Sorry, I'm split across two screens here, and there we go.
Do you want us to field some questions while you're doing that?
Yeah, please do. I'm just going to be installing software here, and that's terrible to watch.
All right, what ones do you want to take? Jason, you want to pick one, or you want me to read one off?
I just saw one that I found amusing, but it's not really amusing, but why is Linux so much more secure as compared to Windows?
Yeah, I found that one amusing too. You go.
That's a hard one to answer. It
is.
Because it's not really apples for apples, or, if you patch and update Linux and Windows, they can be pretty much on par. But there's obviously more to it than that. The reason why we've chosen Linux, we'll discuss later, for the VM, it's like a free operating system, so we can provide it and you don't have to pay. So that's one example. It doesn't really answer your question. Do you have anything, Tom? Sorry, Alex?
Well, so I would add on that it's much, as compared to Windows, one of the advantages is when we say free software, it's also open source. So a lot of the stuff that's used in Linux is open for review from people. So there's less hinkiness going on with the tools because it's open for anybody to take and explore. A lot of times with Windows, you can't get into all the source code, all the odds and ends that are going on. You just have to kind of make a best guess. Additionally, with the more secure, some of it also comes down to user base as well. Windows A lot of people use Windows, so that's where people will target to as well. But it is a very loaded question, so we could probably spend hours going over why is Linux more secure? Is it more secure? Is that even a true statement there? And certainly get some hot debate on both sides. And I'm certain that the discussion will continue, and we can spill that over into Slack as well to kind of keep the why Linux is more secure.
Yeah, we're going to talk about why we're using Kali Linux as the base for the virtual machine. So that would explain some of why we're using Linux. And that's because essentially it's just really locked down, and there's not much running, not much software installed, whereas Windows, you've got heaps of features and things like that need to be patched out. So.
Awesome. Real quick. So VirtualBox is now installed on my machine, but it wasn't really a fair install. I think I still had some config files and some stuff left over from my previous installs. I want to go over here, probably the biggest obstacle you may face when installing VirtualBox on macOS, and that's that the most recent version of macOS tries to do a really good job of not letting things have access to different parts of your system. So in the case of VirtualBox, it needs access to everything because it's running an operating system. So you may have to go into your preferences and security and privacy and accessibility. And then you're going to make sure that VirtualBox is checked. And then I saw where Hart dropped in the chat a really good Slack discussion. And then I know Drop It Like a Hotspot put together a really good walkthrough of how they installed VirtualBox on macOS. So that's been my only real obstacle, getting VirtualBox installed on macOS. Now I am going to play a video of what the install looks like on Windows.
Yeah, so this is an install that I did on my machine here. So I don't know if there's anything that needs to be walked through. I just open up the OVA, and most of the time when I try it, it does throw an error that will highlight here. So you come up with a name, make sure you have the path for where you want it stored, and import it. It gave me an error. And it says click retry to relax the OBS specification and to try the import again. Each time that I've done this, I've retried it.
Real quick.
Sure.
This is you importing the VM, right? You're not setting up. Okay, sorry, this is my bad. This is you importing the VM into VMware.
Yes.
Okay.
This is not me installing VMware.
Okay, I played too soon. My bad.
Ah, okay.
We will press pause on that for 1 second. And then I'll do there we go. I would like us to talk through VirtualBox on Windows. And there could be similar problems with VMware as well, or similar obstacles. Jason, I think you have maybe dealt with this more on the Slack channel, but a thing I saw pop up was like Windows out of the box doesn't like you running hypervisors. And I believe you had to go into the BIOS and make some settings. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so there's so some people that buy new computers, in their BIOS, the virtualization will be turned off, and I can't off the top of my head remember what it's called now. I'll have to, there's a feature. I'll just look it up in a minute and then put it in the chat, but there's a feature in the BIOS that you need to turn on to enable virtualization to even work for 64-bit operating systems, which this is, so you won't be able to run it if that is set. There's also some security features in Windows that disable the use of a hypervisor. is called Credential Guard. So if you have that enabled, like on a, that's probably more going to be enabled on a corporate machine, like a work machine, which you probably wouldn't then want to run this anyway. But if you have that setting enabled, that can also block you from running VMware or VirtualBox.
Yeah, I also have if you need to go into the BIOS in order to enable hypervisor or virtualization, a pro tip that I have is to make sure you have your BitLocker key before you do that. I'm going to wave my hand and say, ask me how I know. And that's because I got BitLockered out of a corporate machine. And that makes for a very fun phone call to your corporate help desk going, I can't get back into my machine. And they go, why? I was trying to turn on virtualization to install a VM. And they go, okay, why? And luckily it was because I'm working for InfoSec. But it's a call that you can easily save if you have that BitLocker key ahead of time. So it was a mistake that I made that I've learned from.
Yes, and here on my screen, if you aren't already, get good at asking questions online, or get good at doing some DuckDuckGoing or Googling. You are almost never the first person to encounter an issue with software like this. So it can just be copy and paste the error into your web browser, and you're probably going to find somebody else has done that on Stack Overflow, on some other forum. Maybe it's so bad that some publication has just done a how-to, or there could be how-to videos. If you do get stuck during the install, I always start by just throwing that error into DuckDuckGo and just seeing what I come up with.
Yeah, you can, and the person asked the question right when I was going to say this is, they said, shouldn't we torture Tom with questions for hours on end? I was going to say that I don't charge for my questions. I may, if it's something that can be easily Googled, I may point that out to you that it can be easily searched. But yeah, I don't charge for questions. I don't think Tom does past a certain point or up to a certain point. So certainly we appreciate having good questions, always do. And sometimes those create some very good answers. Like Tom said, that there's someone that puts together a very good guide in our Slack channel to answer some of the common questions that we have there.
Yeah, and also half the time I'm on Slack, that's just Tom bot anyway, so don't worry about it. That's just AI.
We will make references to Tom being an AI throughout this presentation.
So good. So those are the two big hurdles I've seen on Mac OS. Make sure that VirtualBox has the right accessibility rights. On Windows, you may have to actually go into your BIOS and enable virtualization. Those are the two big things that I've seen. But then you should be able to get up and running with VirtualBox. And
the option was Intel VTD or AMD V. But yeah, if you have questions about that, you can ask us in the Slack.
Very good. So this is what your brand new VirtualBox is going to look like. Cool. But this doesn't really do us a lot of good, because this is just going to be the hypervisor. This is just going to be the thing that makes our operating system believe that it's a real operating system. So we need to find some VMs. There are two different ways you can populate a virtual machine into either VirtualBox or VMware. You could set up a completely brand new machine, and you could tell it, hey, here's the kind of operating system I'm going to run. Here are the, we'll just do a pretend one. You can just say, I'm going to install Ubuntu. And by default, it's going to put it in this VirtualBox VMs folder in my home folder. But this can be wherever you want. Quite honestly, I'm so strapped for space on my MacBook. I run all my normal VMs on an external SSD, and they run just fine. It could be a thumb drive. It could be a separate hard drive. And performance-wise, I've never noticed any huge problems there. Okay, you can tell it how much memory you want to give it. And again, it'll kind of tell you based off your system, like, hey, this might be too much. How am I going to run my regular system? But usually 2 gigs is kind of a sweet spot. Like, you're probably not going to get too much of a performance hit with 2 gigs of RAM. And again, this is the from scratch process. This is not how we're going to do the Trace Labs VM, but we have time, so I'd like to walk you through it. You're going to create a virtual hard disk now. VDI is fine. Here, for most of our use cases, leave this as dynamically allocated. And what that means is you might say, hey, I want to have a 30 gig hard drive, but it's only going to use what it needs. And then it'll fill up to that 30 gigs or that number that you set. So that could be really handy, especially if you're installing on a laptop. You might allocate up to 30 gigs, but it's only going to take up like 12 or 15 initially. So in situations where hard drive space might be at a premium, dynamically allocated is the way to go. If you pick fixed, it's going to take all that hard drive space all at once, and you may get a performance increase depending on, you know, what you're doing in that VM. Okay, we're just going to give it 10 gigs, even though 10's normally not enough to run most systems. And then from here, you can go into settings and tweak things further if you'd like. You can say, hey, I want to give it, you know, more processors. I want to give it less processors. The default is 1. The more you can spare, the better. But again, remember, you still have to have stuff left over to run your computer. You can tell it what kind of network you want. As I said, the default is NAT. We could change that to bridged, and now it's a real entity on my home network. Once you have all this set up, you can double click to imagine this as turning your computer on for the first time. And sorry, it popped up over here. Come on. There it is. And then you have to tell it, hey, here's the install file, and that's almost always going to be a .iso. Here's the image to install from. And then it'll be just like installing an operating system onto your regular computer. So that's kind of the manual process. If you're like test driving a different operating system, that's probably how you're going to go about setting it up. But in the case of what we're doing here, we've created for you a ready to go, already set up operating system. And then you just have to import that file into VirtualBox. So let's delete this. Remove, delete all files. So this is more often than not going to come through as a .ova file. And if you ever see a .ova, think, okay, this is a system somebody has already set up for me. It's essentially already installed. You're just scooting it over to VirtualBox. And now we get to the Trace Labs VM. Alex or Jason, are there any questions for us so far?
Yeah, I'll take a look through them. Someone asked a question, do you think I can run the Trace Labs VM off of a flash drive? And that had some discussion on that. I would agree with yes, that as others had stated, you could. You want a good high read-write rating on that USB drive. Additionally, I've sort of used mine on a flash drive in the aspect that if you have them all contained in a folder, if you're not currently using them, you can always move that virtual machine off to another drive there just to keep space on your host machine. I've done that sometimes as well, that you can store that environment temporarily on an external drive and then bring that environment back down as well.
Excellent. So short answer is yes.
Yes.
Cool. Anything else?
I'm looking through the list here.
I saw one about the VTX setting may not stick after updates or restarts. And I've seen that someone else had that issue as well. I don't think that happens to everyone. So it might be the type of computer, or maybe there's a way to set it permanently, but we'll have to look into that a bit more, I reckon, because I keep hearing about that. It is annoying to have to turn that on every time.
Yeah, and please keep dropping those questions in the Slack as they come up. I mean, like me personally, I've never had trouble on Mac or Linux. So I'm completely ignorant to the plight of Windows users when it comes to things like this. Okay, any other questions before we jump into the Trace Labs VM?
We had one that says, does that file work for Black Arch Linux as well? Not sure what file they're referring to, and I don't have a lot of knowledge with Black Arch Linux.
I'm not sure if they provide an OVA, but what we're showing here is the Trace Labs OVA, but yeah, a lot of different distributions provide an OVA file. So potentially they do.
Yeah, so probably the simplest way that I've kind of got it in my brain is if you ever see a .iso, that's going to be an install image. So you're going to have to go through the manual process that I've just showed you, kind of get your virtual environment ready, and then installing the system on there. If you see .ova, that is an already set up system that you're just going to kind of slide into VirtualBox or VMware.
Yeah, I think
yes.
The one other question that we have is someone says, their Mac system has 8 gigs of RAM and their VMs always seem to lag. Is there any tips for improving performance on a system that doesn't have a ton of memory?
I think the short answer is give it as many resources as you can. So I'm kind of in a similar spot. My MacBook has 8 gigs of RAM, and if I'm not doing anything else on my host system, I'll try and give it between 4 and 6 gigs of RAM and maybe half of my CPU cores and see if that works. Because typically if I'm running a VM, I'm in that VM. So I'm not worried about performance on the host system.
Yeah, so I mean, and I do a similar thing, is just tune what you can, give it what you can. Play around with CPU usage, utilization as well. When I built my current laptop, I knew I was going to run a lot of VMs on it. So I put 32 in here so that I can effectively dedicate 8 gigs to a few different environments if I have to. That might not be the case for everyone. So certainly tune what you can. I had somebody ask the question of repeating that again for the ISO versus OVA.
Oh yeah. So if you ever see a .iso file, think of that as a disk image or an install image. That's going to be the same as like putting back in the old days a CD or a DVD, or plugging a USB into your computer to install an operating system from scratch. So a .iso is going to be a from scratch install, and you have to go through all those steps to kind of get your virtual environment ready. An OVA is a ready-made system, like whether it's the Trace Labs team or whoever, they've already gone through, they've done the install, they've tweaked the settings the way they liked it. They may have even installed some programs, taken some away, and then they've hit export. So that .ova is everything that VirtualBox needs to just boom, there's your system. So they are super convenient, but you do give up a lot of that in like that install control. So you're as far as like the low level system stuff, you're kind of stuck with what we give you. You can still tweak some resource things like, oh, I want to give it more CPUs, more RAM. I want to change the hard drive size. You can do all those things, but as far as how the system was installed, you're not going to have any of that control. So you're gaining convenience at the cost of some control. And that's a really, really good segue. I'm going to put Jason on the spot because without him, there wouldn't be a Trace Labs VM as we know and love it today. So I really want you all to hear from him why we did this. Why is there even a Trace Labs VM in the first place? Why we picked Kali. Jason, could you speak to that a bit?
Yes, I can actually. So this all started when we all started working from home when Corona first hit. And I guess essentially the idea was when we have a capture the flag, we wanted people to have good operational security around their identity and what they're doing on their computer. And we thought a good way to do that was to have a virtual machine that they can separate their normal browsing history and social media profiles away and isolate that in a virtual machine. A really safe tool to use during the capture the flags. The virtual machine is based off of Kali Linux, which is a Linux distribution which is used for pen testing and also it's used by cybersecurity professionals as well. So it was a really good base to use as a virtual machine because by default it has a lot of OSINT tools already packaged inside. And then if you want to do OSINT as well as other things, you might do pen testing or other cybersecurity stuff. You can still install those other tools, but by default, we have removed all the pen testing and the hacking type stuff. And we just have OSINT tools, and we have a lot of good browser configuration. So we have hardening in the browser. We have lots of bookmarks added. What else? You may have heard of the Michael Bazzell book, Open Source Intelligence, which the latest version talks about actually how to create your own virtual machine. We've taken a lot of guidance from that and we've put that into the virtual machine. I actually think it's a really good tool to use I've used it for the capture the flags hope everyone enjoys it.
Excellent. I really like that you brought up the the sandboxing aspect, and this is something Alex hit on too. I said that running a VM isn't going to make you more private or more anonymous, but it can prevent some pretty embarrassing mistakes. So if you're not running a VM and you just open up Chrome or Firefox and you go to Facebook, and you might forget that that you're still logged in as the real you. So now you get 45 minutes into an investigation and you've now done all this investigative work under your real Facebook profile. And that's what Alex calls an oopsie. Or just even if you are like, okay, I'm definitely signed out of my Facebook profile. Now I'm going to sign into my sock puppet. If that's all happening on the same browser, there's definitely the risk that stuff is still lingering, like things like cookies and stuff in your cache. and they could all be talking to each other. And now all of a sudden, Facebook is pretty sure that Sock Puppet and you, at the very least, should be friends, or at the very worst, are the exact same person. So so VMs are a good idea just to prevent that oopsie moment. And I'm glad you brought that up. So here on the Trace Labs site, you can go to Resources, Trace Labs OSINT VM, and you're going to see the .1 release and the .2. .2 is the newest one, and I recommend picking that one. You can also see our most up-to-date installation guide, and as well as the hash of the download if you do want to check that. Okay. And again, you're just downloading TLOSINT 2020.2.OVA. Okay. And then one thing I will call out, I'm not sure, like I run Proton VPN, just to dox myself even further. I run Proton, and I'm not sure if like the Trace Labs host is throttling Proton or the other way around, but I do get pretty slow download speeds when I'm trying to download the VPN. So if it seems like, oh my God, this is going to take half an hour, you might just turn your VPN off, and I guarantee you it's going to go full throttle. So just a call out there. Once you get your OVA downloaded, we're going to come back to our VirtualBox and File, Import Appliance. Okay. And we're going to select the file that we just downloaded and open. Okay. So here it's going to give you a summary of the thing that you're about to install. And these are all notes from us. And then you can see some of the settings of the VM. So you can see by default, it's going to need 2 CPU cores, 2 gigs of RAM, and it doesn't call it out here, but I believe the default is either 30 or 40 gigs of hard drive space. But again, it's dynamically allocated. So like right up front, I think it's going to cost you about 15 to 17 gigs. I think Hart, if you're in the chat, I know you had that exact number recently, so you might call that out. But it is going to cost you between 15 and 20 gigs right out of the gate. And then here is where you want to install that to. By default, it's going to be in your VirtualBox folder in your home directory. You can change that if you want. Like I said, I install all my stuff to a separate drive. Okay. Any questions while we wait on this install?
I think someone asked if you use the free or paid Proton VPN.
Oh, paid because of the bundle. So like, so I get email and VPN, and then they're about to start beta testing Proton Drive. So that's just, I mean, that's my personal pick. My other experience is with Nord. They weren't a bad VPN as far as I can remember, but I do like well, I say bad in the sense of who knows what they're up to. But I like Proton because of the bundle. So if you get mail and VPN, you get a slight discount.
Yeah, I use a variety. One of the things that I like about NordVPN is it's handy to use on all my variety of devices, even those that I give to others that I say, here, you can use NordVPN. It's simple enough for them. I also got it at an extremely discounted price. So general rule with VPNs is I say use what works for you. You don't want to buy a VPN that comes highly recommended and then you never turn it on. That's going to be that's not doing you any help if it has all these great privacy reviews and great recommendations, but you never use it because of any hiccups. It's another question, since we talked about the downloaded. Somebody asked if there was a chance of hosting the OSINT VM on AWS Marketplace for easy hosting on AWS. Not sure where we have it hosted, or where, if there's any plans for anything like that.
We don't have the virtual machine in I think it has to be in an AMI format for that to work. So we haven't quite got to that point yet.
Jason, just to stimulate some discussion, would that be, I'm not familiar, but I'm kind of guessing that's where you could just like spin up our VM on AWS, like on the fly, like similar to like you could get a DigitalOcean droplet with kind of a system already set up. Is that how that would work?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, usually in like a cloud provider, you can just click on, I want Ubuntu, and then it spins it up for you. We only have it in OVA format. We have it also in as an ISO on GitHub, but they're the only two formats we have right now.
Excellent question. Anything else before we get into the VM?
There's a question at the top of the list that probably should just, although we're not talking about sock puppets here, it just says, you mentioned to create socks, we have to make them with a normal IP and ISP, no VPNs or Kali. So I was just going to say, yeah, be careful signing into your sock puppets in a virtual machine or on a VPN. But you could just use incognito mode if you have lots of sock puppets, or just go into each sock puppet and log out of each one. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. And like I said, if we have some time at the end, we can have a great sock puppet discussion, or if that could, full disclosure, I've actually already got that webinar planned out, and it's going to be pretty sweet. So that's probably going to be our next webinar, is a good panel sock discussion. So now that we have it imported, you can see some of the settings we reviewed on the last screen. Processors, RAM. If you do want to change anything, you can go into settings and tweak some things. But let's just run it as is and see how it goes. So it should be as simple as start. Oops, wrong screen. Sorry, I've got Zoom covering everything up. Okay, well, this is a funny oopsie. How do I get my mouse back? It has captured my mouse, and I can't remember the key that gets it back.
All right, well, yeah. Well, I use Control-Alt.
There it goes. Aha, live demo. Okay,
which
so
that's also an interesting call out, because I ran into that a lot of times when helping people through VMs as well. I've come across somebody gets trapped in the VM. So yeah, Control-Alt, certainly write that down or make note of that. I think in my recorded demo, when you launch a machine and go full screen, it'll say, hey, if you want your mouse back, use Control-Alt. Or I guess someone says right arrow, Control-C.
Yeah, and you all couldn't see that because it was on my other screen, but normally your mouse is moving like this is just some other window, and when you're in here, you're interacting with this operating system. But the other way is that the VM can actually capture your mouse, and then you can't leave this window until you press a certain set of keys. And that's going to be different on like VMware versus VirtualBox. It'll normally tell you like when it's captured, and it'll tell you how to get it back. But if you forget that, you're kind of stuck. So here we are at the login screen. The login is OSINT. The password.
Probably gonna need to make that window bigger. It is an eye chart for me and probably for a lot of others.
Hold on, let me get logged in.
Sure.
Well, that's unusual. There we go. That would have been embarrassing. We can't get into our own VM. Okay, let me see what I can do here to make this bigger. So you saw on the login screen, it was kind of like this little tiny box. But then once you actually get it up and running, you should be able to resize it.
So someone's saying, someone says that you can use, I would have to scroll back up, to make it bigger, right arrow, Control F. We're getting there. I pre-recorded mine for my examples for any sort of hiccups like this.
Yeah.
Very smart.
So here we are. I could go full screen, but that's not going to solve the resolution problem. Up here, you do have the option to change the actual resolution of this environment. So right now it's at 100%. So it's trying to present itself like a normal window would. But we should be able to bump that up like that. But for most people, if you're interacting with your machine on your computer, 100% is probably going to be fine. Just for the purposes of demonstration. There we go. Okay, here we are. We made it. An hour and a half into our Trace Labs VM webinar. We're finally in the webinar. Hopefully you'll have found value in all the other conversation, though. I did want to make sure that we didn't skip over anything or assume some knowledge or experience that might not be there. So this is going to be the screen whenever you log into the VM. And if you're not familiar with Kali or not familiar with Linux, I do want to give you kind of a quick tour, and then we'll talk through why things kind of are the way that they are, as well as demoing how to use some of the stuff that we've built in here. So here on the desktop, you're going to find an icon called Updater. This is our attempt, and I say attempt, to make the OS and application update process as simple as possible. So normally, to update your Linux system, you would open up a terminal. And I'll try and make this bigger. So normally on a Linux system, you would open up a terminal and you would have to update your repositories. And I'm not going to do that because that might take a little bit since this is a fresh out of the box system. And then you would upgrade those repositories. But then if you've downloaded any software outside of those repositories, then you would have to do those through some other way. If it's a Python package you got, from pip, you'd have to upgrade it through pip. If it's source code you're just grabbing off of GitHub, you would have to pull down that latest GitHub repo. So this is our attempt to save you a lot of that headache, from like knowing, okay, what was pip, what was, Kali repos, what was GitHub. This updater button is our attempt to just take care of all that for you and update everything in the background. Now, one thing that's worth calling out here, and we had a really good question about this earlier, this system is out of date. So if you consider that we built this, gosh, it's been maybe 2 months ago now, feels like forever. We built this some time ago off whatever the current Kali was. Well, a lot has changed, or a lot has happened since then. So you do want to update your system. If this is your first time running it, I would say the very first thing to do is just run the updater. And at the very least, that's going to get your Kali system up to date. One other thing that's worth calling out, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and do this. If this is your first time, maybe in a Linux environment, the terminal is going to be your buddy. So please get used to this. I would encourage anyone in the chat, if you have any like Linux terminal cheat sheet references, websites or videos, feel free to drop those links in the chat. I don't want to take for granted that people out there, are comfortable with the terminal and are comfortable with a Linux system. This VM is based off of Kali 2020.2, but Kali currently is on their .3 release, and that's okay because we can upgrade to that. So I'm just going to actually kick that off. Oh, and if you're curious, sudo just means run this command with elevated privileges. So it allows me to be logged in as a non-root user, but still do low-level things with the operating system. While this is updating, Jason, do you want to give just kind of a real quick overview of the VM and like maybe how it's organized, or some of the things that they're not going to find here that they might be expecting from Kali, or some of the things we've had to add in addition to?
Yeah, okay. So I guess the main thing is that this is a good base for performing OSINT searches. So one of the fundamental things in OSINT would be your browser, and then just not even tools. Like there's probably not a huge amount of OSINT tools out there. You'd probably mainly use the browser. So we wanted to make sure that the browser was configured in a way that would protect your privacy. And we have a whole bunch of bookmarks, as I said earlier. We have a menu there on the top left with different categories of applications. Yeah, so you might just want to show the bookmarks that are there.
Definitely. So this is worth calling out. I'm trying to update this. Well, I'm trying to do a lot of things. I'm trying to, do a live stream while I'm running a VM on my MacBook, but I'm trying to update the VM while, opening up a web browser. And there is a pretty pronounced lag. So I don't normally get this if I'm just in the VM. So that was actually kind of my bad for trying to do an update while doing some other things. Because if you'll remember, it's only got, 2 gigs of RAM and 2 CPU cores, and it's trying to do an entire system update. So that was actually my bad, but we'll get this thing calmed down. Sorry, Jason, if you want to keep going.
Yeah, that's right. There's actually a question here from John. about sock puppets being used in the VM. Our advice there was generally when you create one, you may want to look like a normal person signing up for a account, but you can certainly use your sock puppets inside the VM, and that's really one of the main points of this virtual machine, is that you would go into the browser, sign into your sock puppets, and perform searches in the browser like you would on your Mac or Windows PC. So yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's also so good that for sock puppets, in that like your VM, like if you never sign into your real accounts on a VM, and you probably shouldn't, then you have that segmentation and those assurances that you don't have to worry about using the wrong Facebook, because you never use your real Facebook account or LinkedIn or Instagram account in your virtual environment. It never touches it there. So then if you do accidentally click on a Facebook link, it's not going to open it up. It's going to open it up under your sock puppet and not under your real account.
And you guys just saw one of the best things about virtual machines. If something's going wrong, just shut it down. No big deal. You know, whereas if you had to do that with your laptop or your PC, you're like wasting minutes of your life. So
I had
something is going just horribly wrong, just shut it down and start over.
Yeah, I had a fun, I pushed out a fun GIF for that, for if you didn't have a VM or a VPN, and it has that scene from GoldenEye where you're just ripping the boards out of the computer. Yeah, so here, virtual environment, you just revert. And I think I have a recorded demo on doing that.
Okay, and it's actually gone back to the original resolution. Cool. Oops, it's a little too big.
And someone did ask, should we change our VM password for better security? Yes. I think even just boiling that down to, should we change our password for better security? Yes. There's also a good practice that I do as well, is I change the host name of my virtual machines as well, so that it doesn't, it's not really a concern with the Trace Labs machine, but I also change the host name there so that it doesn't read as Kali, because it may be, if I make it something more clever or something more obscure, that would certainly help out. So you don't want your, again, a lot of OSINT is about blending in.
So here to demo what Jason was talking about before I so selfishly updated my system. So this is the menu. It's going to be organized much like every menu you've seen in, you know, Windows or any other Linux distro. And we've tried to break this out into categories that make sense from an OSINT investigation point of view. So social media, you're going to see social media tools. Domains, you're going to see domain tools. Note-taking, there's Alex's favorite cherry tree. So on and so forth. So unlike maybe like say Windows, where you would use this to launch an application, for the tools, this doesn't actually launch the application. Instead, it opens up a terminal and then feeds the help flag to that program. So if you're like, hey, I clicked on Twint, you know, why didn't it work? It's because it's just the idea is, hey, here's the program, and here's the program telling you how to use it. So don't be shy. Like, don't feel like something's not working if you click on a tool and you wind up with a screen like this. For people that don't have a lot of like Linux in their background, these help screens are going to be incredibly helpful. So starting here at the beginning.
There's not a huge there's no, I was going to say there's not a huge amount of OSINT tools. The ones that are there can help speed up things that you might do in a browser. So like Twint can mass download a whole bunch of messages based on a certain hashtag or something like that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. These tools that we have included here are no replacement for actual fundamental technique. Instead, that's just, you know, some software engineers attempt to automate that technique. But you have to understand what's going on in order to take advantage of that information. So like, you know, Twint can do a lot of cool things with someone's, you know, Twitter history. But if you as an investigator don't really understand what to do with that information, then that tool is not going to be incredibly useful. Okay.
I think we are getting close to that 2-hour mark as well.
We are.
So there is an option to download the webinar to watch it later.
Oh yeah.
So it will be recorded for those of us that, again, we thank you for joining us in the middle of the night. And for some people there, I think Jason, it's morning for you there.
It's lunchtime.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So again, we respect people's time and thank you for joining us on this Friday night, Saturday morning. But yes, it will be available to download later.
Yeah, and it unfortunately fired up 3 different instances of Firefox on me, and my two CPUs and my 2 gigs of RAM is not doing well with that. So I do apologize for this. Okay, while I'm waiting for those to close down, let me see if I can pull up my terminal.
One thing that we will look at changing is we're potentially going to change the browser because we offer Chromium as well. And the search party website for the CTF doesn't at the moment work very well with Firefox. So you might want to keep that in mind when you're doing a Trace Labs CTF.
And I'm going to cheat just a little bit. So, and I can't really say how much of this lag is my system and how much of it is, you know, like I'm trying to pipe this onto a 4K display and stream it, and do not capture, and how much of it is, you know, the VM itself. Because I can say it's never been that laggy when I'm normally using it, but I'm also not normally full screening it while I'm trying to stream as well. But I do want to jump in there before we hit time, show you how to use some of the command line tools. The web browser, it's unfortunate that was misbehaving, but the most important part of the web browser, and in my opinion, this is the most valuable part of the VM itself, are the bookmarks. I'd say 99% of people OSINT can happen inside of a web browser. If you talk to people like Joe Gray, you know, that like train this stuff for a living, a lot of those professionals don't use a lot of OSINT tools. They use really, really good technique, and then they use a couple of tools to automate that technique. Okay, let's try and save my system a little bit. Yeah, I think a lot of this is my poor little MacBook is trying to do too many things at once. Okay. So to run these tools from the command line, you can open up a terminal. Oops. So the way we have it set up here, if you're familiar with running things from the command line, this is actually going to be a little bit different. So we've attempted to make this as simple as possible so that you as a user don't have to worry about, is this a Python application? Like, is this built into the Kali system? Like, how do I get this running? So for all the tools that you see in this menu over here, you can just type the name of the program. And like I said, like .h is going to, it'll tell you essentially how to run it. A useful thing in the Linux terminal is you can pipe that output to a program called less or more, either way. And then you can just arrow through the feedback there. So in the case of twint, you just have to type twint. And then these little flags here are the information that you're going to pass on to the program. So just as a quick demo, we'll just try twint on myself. So it's expecting -u and then their Twitter handle. Let's see what that looks like. Something to know if you're not really familiar with the Linux terminal. If you don't see a new prompt to type at, that means that it's working. Like, not every program that you're going to run here is going to say, hey, I'm 85% done, or hey, here's some stuff that I'm working on. It's going to appear as though it's hanging. It's actually just working. So this might take a little bit because right now it's pulling down my entire Twitter history. But if you go through the help menu, you can see different ways to filter that by, like after a certain date, before a certain date, only containing these hashtags. But this sort of structure here is how you're going to use almost all of the command line tools that are in here. It's going to be program name and then passing it some options. But I can't say it enough. The true value of this VM lies in the web browser. I just don't want to spawn 3 of them, unfortunately, and those bookmarks. And that can be feedback from you all. Like, if you know of resources that aren't included in those bookmarks, let us know. And we can get that added into the next release. And as I said a long time ago, like, you can modify this however you want. It's persistent. So any changes that you make here are going to be like, they're going to stick. So if you want to add your own bookmarks, they're going to stay. If you want to download and install your own programs, that's cool too. Alex or Jason, anything to add as we're coming up on time?
I think I would have talked about like the aspect of snapshots there.
Very good.
For taking a snapshot after you do an update. I generally take a snapshot and label that as this is where I did updates at. And then if I revert back to that one, first thing I do is do the updates and then make a new snapshot. So wherever I revert to is just a fresh machine that's recently updated.
Very good. Yeah. So before you're doing, like, before you're making maybe certain changes to your VM, you can take a snapshot and then you can always roll back if things don't go as intended.
Or it's just good practice, even if things go as intended, then all that information that you have, you can archive or otherwise blow away, and then you're just reverting back to a fresh machine that, only opened up Firefox to do updates, and that's it. Doesn't have any of that contamination or slowdown or hiccups there. So any ghosts in the machine you purge when you revert back to your freshly updated machine. And that way, if you are logging in at the morning of a CTF and you want to do updates to that fresh thing, You're only grabbing the updates from when you last did it, which might have been earlier in the week. Then you're only grabbing a couple incremental updates instead of waiting for this, instead of being there at the start of the CTF, waiting for everything to finish updating so you can get going.
Yeah. And I really hope that everyone out there watching has hopefully seen the same value that I did when we were putting this presentation together. You know, it was a Trace Labs VM webinar, but we spent 90% of the time talking about everything leading up. The virtual machine itself is incredibly simple. I mean, it really is just a stripped down Linux operating system. It's got a web browser with some preloaded bookmarks and a couple of tools that we found useful. And I'd say 90% of the questions we get in the Slack are everything leading up to the virtual machine. Once you're in here, it's just an operating system. So it's pretty straightforward. Man, I must have a big Twitter history. Maybe I've been tweeting more than I realized.
So one of the interesting questions that was asked is if we prefer to keep the same VM for multiple engagements, CTFs, or prefer to wipe the slate clean each time. They're asking because we mentioned creating your own bookmarks. I prefer wiping the slate clean each time. A way that I do bookmarks is that you can have your own bookmarks as part of that updating process. Is that you've done the updates, you added your bookmarks there, and then you just take that and take that snapshot and that's your clean slate. Another trick I like to do with some of the bookmarks or tools that I have is I like to store them out on my GitHub as well. And then that way, I love that for virtual machines, because if I am in a completely new operating system or something, I can go, hey, I've got some useful tools, useful bookmarks. Where are they? Just go out to my GitHub, bring them down, and they're there. So that's kind of a bit more advanced trick there. A lot of times I do wipe the slate clean each time and just get it into a state that's as clean as possible and revert to that between each CTF. And that also brings up a point that we're not retaining information from our CTFs. So when you do your investigations, there's not really any need for you as a participant to retain the information at the conclusion of the event.
There is a setting on the browser where once you close it, the cookies and everything, temporary files actually get wiped. So you could potentially keep using the VM in its form.
Yep. And as we come up on time, I did want to point out our GitHub repo, github.com, Trace Labs, TLOSINT-live. If for some reason you wanted to build the VM from scratch, this is the process you could do it. This is also where you can open up issues with the VM. A lot of the improvements we've made to the VM so far have been either from feedback in the Slack or from people opening up issues on GitHub. GitHub issues are probably better for us because they allow us to stay organized and kind of keep track of what we need to be working on. So please check that out. And I mean, you could contribute. I mean, this is open source. Please, we need all the help that we can get. And the last thing I'll call out, I do apologize that the VM did not run kind of as I intended. But in the future, you are going to see focused videos on our YouTube channel. Like, hey, everyone, in this 15-minute video, we're going to be going through all the social media tools and bookmarks in the VM. In this other video, we're going to be going through, all the email tools. So don't feel like you've, missed out there. We are going to be doing more focused, much shorter videos showcasing the different tools and how you would use them. Do we have any final questions, Alex?
I'm not sure where he is.
Uh-oh. Okay,
No, yeah, I don't have any final.
Let me see here. Okay. So question from Charlotte. Can we use Proton VPN and Trace Labs OSINT VM at the same time? Yes. So the virtual machine and a VPN are two totally separate things. So you could absolutely use them at the same time. And if you're running your VPN on your host machine and you leave all the settings default with the VM is going to use that same VPN tunnel that your host is. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. Is it safe to buy/use satellite broadband? Excellent question. I have no idea, unfortunately. I would assume it'd be the same as any other ISP. Okay. Is there any way to disable just Alt-Tab in VirtualBox? I want to be able to Alt-Tab between the VM and my host computer and in my host computer. It's a good question.
Not sure. I'll have to
that's probably
look at that back later.
Google. Okay. Alex already answered the one about, do you keep the same VM for multiple engagements? Let's see here. I see a couple of really good SOC questions. Please drop those in the SOC Puppet question channel. Okay. All right. Well, that is time, everyone. I hope that you all have found as much value in this as we did. We can keep the discussion going in the Slack channel. This is going to be this has been recorded. It is going to be posted on, on our YouTube channel. And if anyone was a little bit disappointed that you didn't get to see more of the tools in action, don't worry. We do have focused videos planned for each one of those aspects of the VM as well. Alex, do you have any final thoughts?
No, other than like we're available and stuff too. So it doesn't have to stop as we hit time. Ask questions in the Slack channel. Ask questions to me. I mean, I'll give my time as necessary. That if I need to run a demo myself, we can set that up again. If I need to work one-on-one with some people, we all do that. I'd be able to continue the conversation afterwards. I don't want to speak for the others on the panel, but I think they would also help troubleshoot as well beyond this.
Yeah, and that's the only way that we make this product better. If we were the only ones using it, then we're never going to know that anything's wrong or that something might not be clear. So my final thought is keep engaging with all of us, keep engaging with each other. I always just get super excited when I go to answer someone's question and somebody else from the Slack beats me to it. I'm like, yes, that's a community. That's how it works. So that's kind of my final thought. Jason, anything to leave us with?
Sorry, I was pressing on mute. No, you pretty much covered it quite well.
All right. Well, big thank you for...
Alex, thanks to everybody out there.
Yeah. Big thank you for giving us 2 hours of your life. That's 2 hours none of us will ever get back, but I think it was well spent. Hope you all have a good evening, a good morning, a good afternoon. That's all we got.
See ya.
Thanks, guys. Bye, everybody.